Hey y'all, today's video is a 5-step checklist of things you need to know about before you start fundraising for your nonprofit. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. So if you need help with your nonprofit, make sure you are subscribed to this channel because I drop videos every single week. And today I'm talking about raising money for your nonprofit. And I just wanted to go over 5 things you should have on your checklist when you want to start fundraising. All right. And this is really related to administratively. It's not necessarily related to like how to ask for money or how to like write out fundraising appeals or how to apply for grants and stuff like that. I'm talking mostly about like the behind the scenes administrative paperwork, things you should know about, things you should be keeping track of. I just want to share 5 of those things so you're more prepared. Now, if you want a video that gives you like a primer of how to fundraise and like what are the steps you need in place to raise money for your nonprofit, then I am linking a video above that walks through that for you. And I'm also below in the description box putting a link to my fundraising masterclass, which will actually outline a lot of the steps you need to fundraise. If you need to know how to build your fundraising program from the ground up, then that fundraising masterclass will cover all of that for you. Okay, so number 1, you need to make sure that your accounting is in place so that you are prepared to track the money that you are earning or that's being given to your nonprofit. So you need to make sure that you have some system in place that's tracking the money that comes in and the money that goes out. Now, I want to be clear when I talk about this. First of all, I'm using very simple terms so that it's not overcomplicated and it doesn't intimidate you. But the other reason why I'm using very simple terms is because I'm not an accountant. And so I can't answer very specific questions about your books or your chart of accounts. You need to talk to an accountant if you have specific questions, but I always like to flag things or just give you a heads up on stuff you should know about so you can investigate further. Now, I have done accounting, right? I've done do-it-yourself accounting for a nonprofit I've worked with and also for myself. So I do have some knowledge, but I'm just going to be clear again. I'm not an accountant. I'm not your accountant. So if you have specific questions, you need to talk to one. But I do want to just be clear, like you need to be sure what your chart of accounts is. And that's just all of the things or all of the categories that you have organized to track your spending and to track the money that you're making. So in terms of your expenses, what are the categories that you're using to track how you're spending it and how are you organizing that? Are you organizing it by program? And that becomes important when you win grants, when your grant funder wants to see that you only spent certain money on certain expenses or certain programs. That's why you need to think about this early on, like how you're organizing your accounting. When it comes to your income, sometimes your donors have very specific limits on what you can spend money on. Sometimes a donor will say, I only want you to spend money on materials, or I only want you to spend money for staffing. They'll be very specific about how they want you to spend the money. That happens all the time with grants. And so you need to be tracking that specific income account in a specific way so you can then show your donors or your funders that you did as you agreed to when you received the money. So I just want to be clear. It's one thing to want to make money and be fully funded and be great that you have the money that you need, but it's another thing to maintain it, to track it, to make sure you're upholding good accounting practices. That's a whole nother thing. So make sure you're prepared for that when you go into this process. Number 2, sometimes states require fundraising disclosures or some kind of disclosure on appeals, right? So whatever state office that requires charitable solicitation, it's usually your attorney general's office, but it's not always in certain states. But the same office is usually the same one that requires charitable solicitation, will require that you put some kind of disclosure about what you're raising money for or about your organization. And sometimes the disclosure just says, if you want to review some information like the 990, then you can contact this, or it will be readily available when requested. Sometimes they'll actually require that you have that on your fundraising appeals. So I just want to give you a heads up that you make sure you do the research and see what's required and then put that on any materials that you have or whatever they're requiring of you. Number 3 is very much related to the example that I gave and what I just talked about, but it's all around your 990 form. Your 990 form is your annual tax form that you submit to the IRS when you have 501c3 status, right? And so that is the form that allows the IRS to monitor what you're doing and to see where your money's coming from, to make sure you're spending the money the way you're supposed to be spending the money. They also want to keep track of what activities that you're doing to make sure it's still in line with what you said you would be doing. And they're just tracking to make sure you're doing mission related activities, because if they get wind that you're doing something that's not mission related, they want to know about it and they want you to report it. So your 990 form is really important to submit. There are 3 different versions of the form. There's the postcard, there's the easy, and then there's just the regular form. But whatever form that you're filling out, you need to make sure it's available for public disclosure. If someone requests that they want to see your 990 form, you cannot withhold that information from them. It is a public document. And so I want you to understand also that the IRS will release some information. So sometimes people can find your 990 anyway, but you also have the power to redact, meaning you can black out some things that you don't want people to see. In your 990, some foundations will do that. They'll send in redacted versions. And so you may have the ability to redact some of that information. I would talk to a lawyer or an accountant to be sure about what you can and cannot redact. Don't talk to me about that because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm just giving you a heads up. But I just wanted to be clear that when someone requests that information, you can't withhold information like that. That's public information. They're public documents. And a lot of times, if people know where to go, they can find the information anyway. So if I'm interested in the foundation and I want to get money from them, I can look up their 990 form right now and I can see who they've given money to. I can see who's on their board because it's all public information. So this is just a reminder that when you signed up to start a nonprofit, this is a public organization and there are some things that are publicly available. So you want to think about that when you're filling out forms, or just think about that and be mindful of the kind of information that people will see. So number 4 is about your donation receipts. You want to get clear on what your strategy is around your receipts before you start receiving money, because you don't want to get to a point where you're overloaded and it's like months later and you haven't sent in a receipt. Now, I did a whole video on this, and so I'm linking it above where I break it down some more, and I also linked in that video some good information and websites that can break it all down for you. And honestly, the IRS does a really good breakdown, even though sometimes it gets really complicated. They do break it down, but the rules are just complicated. So you're not required to send a donation receipt for every single donation, and this is as of 2022. This may change, so I just want to give you that heads up. It's only certain donations over a certain amount, but it's good practice to send a receipt after every donation because it just makes life easier and it makes things more efficient. So you don't have to figure out, okay, should I send it to this person, not this person, why not? Instead of having to think through all of that, just automatically do it. So you want to think about what should be on your donation receipt and how people are receiving it. And also, if people give certain ways, how are you going to know when they give and what's the trigger and who's responsible for sending out that donation receipt? It's easier when you're using like an online donation platform where they can automatically send it out for you, but it's not as easy if people are giving you cash or people are giving you checks, or if you're using things like Cash App or Venmo. Okay, which I really don't like for nonprofits, but that's for another video. So just be thinking about like all the different ways you can accept money and you're going to be getting money, and then what are the triggers to make sure that people get their receipts. And then the last thing I want to talk about today is related to your donation receipts, but it's around your end of year reporting. So by January 31st of the next year, you want to report to your donors a list of what they gave. Like you want to give a round up summary of what they gave in the previous year. But if you have a lot of donors or if you had a lot of activity, you need to be really organized so that you're not cramming everything at the last minute. Because people want their donation receipts, right? They want to know what they gave if they're trying to file their taxes in a timely manner. So if you are going to send an end of year summary report, then think about like how you're going to do that. What's the mechanism for rounding that up? How are you going to send it to people? Are you going to mail it to people or are you going to email it? Do you have everyone's addresses? Do you have everyone's information? Do you have their email addresses? Were you tracking by person? And what was the thing that you're tracking by? Were you tracking by a person's name? Were you tracking by their email? Does everyone have like a donation ID, like a donor ID? How are you pulling all that together? That can get really complicated when you're doing this by hand or when you have spreadsheets. That's why CRMs, customer relationship management, or they're often called donor databases or donor relations databases. Those kind of databases are really important because when people donate, you can track immediately and put in information like the date, the amount, the person, email address, physical address, phone number, stuff like that. And it will keep track for you so you can do reports at the end of the year that makes it way easier for your nonprofit. So just wanted to flag that because if you want to do end of year reports summarizing people's donations, then you got to be prepared for that because that takes a lot of time and organization. Y'all, was that helpful? What other things do you want to hear about on these videos? I am all ears. I want to hear from you all about what you want to talk about. If you need help with your nonprofit, make sure you visit me at www.bossonabudget.com and I will see you in the next video.